So in the UK recently, there's been a couple of new business ventures and business ideas which I think are worth discussing because these ideas revolve around the concept of blending animal products with plant products. Now, the concept of blending plant and animal products together isn't necessarily something new. It's actually happened in the US with a few different companies before, and a couple of those product lines have failed because of lack of consumer support. But nonetheless, it's an idea that seems to be taking off a little bit more here in the UK. And this seems to be particularly because of two companies, one called Smug Dairy and another that we have probably all heard of, Quorn. Now, I want to start with Smug Dairy. Basically, Smug Dairy is a new business that is owned by Kerry Dairy Ireland. So it's a business that is part of the dairy industry, was created by the dairy industry. I think this is interesting because Smug Dairy, their range of products are milks, cheese, butter that are a blend of dairy, so cow's milk, and oats together. I think this is really interesting for two reasons. Firstly, because I suppose it's suggestive of an awareness in the dairy industry that something is changing and is changing around them, and that if they don't start to be a part of this change, they're going to get left behind. I think it's quite interesting from that perspective. What does this mean from the dairy industry's perspective? Now, Kerry Dairy Ireland is a part of the Irish dairy industry. And so it's actually quite interesting because the dairy industry is such a big part of the Irish landscape, of Irish agriculture, of the Irish economy, of the culture for many people in Ireland. So I actually find it quite telling that even the dairy industry in Ireland are starting to acknowledge the need for change. This acknowledgement becomes even more interesting when we look at the branding around Smug Dairy and how they're promoting themselves. Now, bear in mind, like I just said, this is a business that was created by a company, an organization that is a huge part of the dairy industry. So in effect, this is the dairy industry creating a product, and this is the branding and messaging that they're still choosing to use. So for example, let me just read out a couple of quotes from Smug Dairy's website. At Smug Dairy, we believe delicious choices can also be more carbon conscious choices. That's why we craft our products with a thoughtful blend of dairy and oat milk, reducing CO2 emissions by up to 54% compared to traditional dairy. And in another quote, Smug's blend of dairy and plants means it contains lower saturated fat compared to standard dairy. And there are loads of other health benefits too. I mean, talk about an own goal, right? Isn't this the dairy industry basically admitting that the less dairy you consume and the more plants, the better? I mean, they're literally promoting this brand, Smug Dairy, as being good precisely because it's not entirely made from dairy. They're saying, hey, buy Smug Dairy. The reason why you should buy Smug Dairy is that because when you compare it to regular dairy, it's more sustainable and it's healthier for you too. This is essentially what vegans have been saying all along. Smug Dairy exists in a really unusual place where they acknowledge that consuming plants over animals is preferable, but they still haven't decided to create an entirely plant-based business. I mean, the logical conclusion should be, hey, if plants are better for all of these reasons, then let's just consume plants, which is precisely the vegan position. I mean, of course, the vegan position is, hey, let's consume plants over animals because it's more ethical and doesn't involve the exploitation of animals. That's the reason why we make that call. But outside of that, we also talk about the sustainability and health reasons for doing so as well. And if you just even look at those two reasons, the impact on the planet and the impact on ourselves as human beings, well, the messaging that Smug Dairy are using is telling us to consume plants over animals. It's just for some reason they've decided this unusual and bizarre blend is some kind of compromise when it's just illogical, really, isn't it? And of course, from an ethical position, it's still incredibly immoral because it's a blend which includes dairy. But I wanted to reference Smug Dairy because when I saw their branding, I couldn't believe it. On the one hand, as a vegan, I get told all the time, cattle farming's fine. It's good for the planet. We don't have to worry about it. And cow's milk, it's good for you. Good for bones, good for protein. Drink up your cow's milk, right? Dairy's good for it. Feed it to children, feed it to old people. Everyone should eat dairy. This is the kind of propaganda that we as vegans have to combat all the time. Oh, it's not bad for the planet and it's really good for you. And yet, the dairy industry in Ireland, one of the biggest industries in Ireland, the dairy industry in Ireland have created a business called Smug Dairy that is promoting itself based on the fact that dairy is actually not good for the planet and not good for your health. I'm just jumping in very quickly, as while there might be controversy around blending meat and plant protein together, one thing we can all agree on is that subjects such as mathematics, science, technology, and computer programming are all incredibly important, which brings me to today's partner, Brilliant. Brilliant is a learning platform where you learn by doing, with thousands of interactive lessons that cover all the subjects I just mentioned, plus even more. Now, each lesson is filled with hands-on problem solving that lets you play with concepts, which actually increases the effectiveness of the learning process. Plus, the content on Brilliant is crafted by an award-winning team of teachers, researchers, and academics from places like Google, MIT, and Caltech. Brilliant has lessons that cater for all skill levels, and on top of everything I've already mentioned, they also have lessons on things like AI and large language models, and of course things like creative coding and programming. Now, to try everything that Brilliant has to offer for free for 30 days, and to get 20% off a premium annual subscription, where you can either click the link in my description or scan the QR code on the screen now. So a huge thank you to Brilliant for sponsoring today's video, but now, let's talk more about these blended products. I think instinctively Quorn feels a little bit different, and I'll talk a little bit more in detail in a second about what Quorn have decided they're going to do. But I think instinctively what Quorn have done feels like a betrayal, because Smug Dairy is part of the dairy industry. But the way that Quorn has historically been positioned makes it feel like it's actually more closely aligned with the plant-based sector than the animal-based sector. But of course, this isn't true. Quorn have been around for about 40 years, so 4 decades. And in that time, they've always used animal products. They've always been a vegetarian company. They use eggs, they use dairy for cheese. So basically, they've always been a vegetarian company. So actually, they're very similar to Smug Dairy and the dairy industry because they're a vegetarian company. So even though I think instinctively it feels like more of a betrayal, it isn't. This is a vegetarian company that exploits animals and always has, continuing to exploit animals just in different ways and, in non-vegetarian ways, which, of course, ethically for us as vegans, we know is kind of irrelevant, whether it's vegetarian or meat. It's still immoral, still involves slaughterhouses, still involves animal exploitation. So basically, let me just give you a little bit of context. Quorn have recently announced that their mycoprotein, which is essentially the fungus-based plant alternative protein that they use in their meat-free products, this mycoprotein is now going to be blended with animal flesh to create a range of 50-50 products. Even just saying that out loud, it's just so crazy, really, isn't it, to think of this in this way? To think that we're going to have this blend of processed meat and Quorn mycoprotein, and this has been positioned as a good thing. I want to go into more detail about that in a moment, because I guess there are some conflicting views around this, and there are alternate ways of viewing this decision. But the first thing I wanted to establish is how this product is going to be used, because one of the selling points that Quorn are using is they're saying, hey, this is going to be used by the NHS. And to me, that feels instinctively wrong, because the 50% that is animal flesh is processed meat, which is carcinogenic. And so even though these sausages may be 50-50, it's still a 50% carcinogen. The first thing that came to my mind when I read that is, why on earth is the NHS serving processed meat in any way? Why are people being given carcinogens in hospitals? We wouldn't give people cigarettes in hospitals, so why would we give them processed meat in hospitals? It's one thing someone deciding to eat processed meat on their own accord, even though it's carcinogenic. It's another thing our healthcare system feeding people carcinogenic processed meat. Now, call me crazy, but it seems to me that if there was at least one place on earth where only healthy food would be consumed, it would be in hospitals. But I suppose more broadly, outside of healthcare, is it a good thing or a bad thing that mycoprotein has been blended with animal flesh? Now, as a vegan, my first thought is to go, this is obviously a bad thing. And when I first saw the articles about this, my first reaction was, what are Quorn doing? How can Quorn be doing this? What are they thinking? Who are they appealing to? And I do still feel that way the most. I've been thinking a lot about this. I've come at this from a couple of different viewpoints. The first viewpoint being super outraged. This is a travesty. This is unforgivable. And then I've thought to myself, hang on a minute, am I missing something here? Am I kind of not viewing this from a more objective position? Am I viewing this from too much of my position? Is there something I'm missing? Is this a good thing? Could there be a way in which this is helpful? And I've tried to view it as objectively as I can to not demonize something too much, but at the same time view this as being the immoral thing that it is, right? And so after all of this thinking that I've been doing, the only way that I can see this as being positive, I think, is if these products appeal to the ardent meat eaters. This is the person who wants to eat meat, won't choose a plant-based option, but would choose this 50-50 option. But I don't think those people really exist. I think if someone wants to eat meat and doesn't have a problem with eating meat, they'll eat meat. And I think the only people that this is therefore really appealing to are flexitarians. And I guess this is probably the argument that Quorn would use. This is probably the person they think they're appealing to. They probably don't think they're appealing to the ardent meat eater, but appealing to someone who's more open-minded. But let's say someone is a flexitarian. Let's say they are open-minded. That means that they would eat something that doesn't contain meat. This implies to me, at least, that they would be open-minded to choose the meat-free option and hopefully the plant-based option. So why are we creating this product for them? Because these people are already open-minded to not eating meat. So I just don't get why this product exists then. Because if it's not for the person who will eat meat and won't touch a plant-based option, even though I think that's the only way that this product becomes positive overall, is if it would appeal to that person. But if it wouldn't appeal to that person, and it would only appeal to a flexitarian, are we not actually giving them a product that may compel them to eat more meat than they actually do now? For example, let's say this. Let's say you're a flexitarian, and you've decided that as part of your flexitarianism, 3 days a week, you're going to eat something that's meat-free. Let's say plant-based, because that's what we'd want it to be, plant-based. But then the 4 days of the week, the other 4 days, you just eat whatever you want. And in your head, you're justifying that by saying, well, on 3 days a week, I'm eating a plant-based meal for dinner. Now you come across this product that's this blend. It's a 50-50 blend. And it's been pitched towards you because you're the flexitarian. You are the consumer that this product apparently exists for. Now, you might therefore think that this 50-50 product is more suitable to the 3 days a week that you eat plant-based. That's where this product naturally fits in, because that's your flexitarianism. Those 3 days are essentially your flexitarianism, and the 4 days are 4 days where you're just eating whatever you want. So does that not therefore mean, perhaps, that these products might encourage flexitarians to eat more meat? Because they might have chosen the plant-based option, but now they're going to choose a 50-50 option instead. And as a consequence, will be eating 50% more meat than they would have done if they'd chosen the plant-based option. I think that becomes potentially a scary reality here. Now let's also view it this way. If someone eats a plant-based dinner 3 days a week, and then decides that they want to eat these 50-50 blends instead, they would therefore have to eat these 50-50 blends 6 days of the week to have the same impact as having the plant-based 3 days a week did before, because they'd have to eat twice as much to have the same impact, right? Now, to have a more positive impact, which is what Quorn is saying, these products they're saying will help reduce meat consumption. Well, if that was true, that would mean the flexitarian would have to eat the 50-50 blend 7 days a week, so every day of the week. But a flexitarian is someone who doesn't want to commit to something all the time. They, in essence, want to do something for 2, maybe 3 days a week, and then for the rest of the week, just do whatever they want. So it is offering them a product, which means that essentially they would have to commit more days of the week to this way of thinking to have the same impact actually going to help. This is where I become quite worried about this range of blended products, because what's the evidence that it will actually be good overall? And I think that's a really important question. Where is the evidence? Quorn haven't provided any evidence. They've not done any research themselves. And as far as I can see, there's not any independent research that's looking at this and trying to establish whether or not these products will decrease meat consumption overall. If that evidence isn't being presented, it feels quite disingenuous for Quorn to say that these products will result in that outcome. And that's kind of what they're saying. That is what they're saying. They're saying that these products will reduce meat consumption. But without any evidence to prove that, how can they make those statements? This is where I get quite uncomfortable about all of this. Because to me, This feels more like a commercial opportunity. So in effect, Quorn will sell their mycoprotein to other companies that will create these blended foods. That's how it seems to me based on what they've been saying. So actually, they've just opened up a new revenue stream for themselves. And I think that's kind of what this comes down to, right? This is a commercial opportunity, but they're trying to pitch it as being something else, not a commercial opportunity, but something great. This will help us decarbonize our food system more, is one of the things that they've said. This will help us make people healthier, is another argument that they're using. This will help us reduce meat consumption. But will it? Does the evidence exist to support that? Or perhaps, as my fears might suggest, could it actually encourage flexitarians to eat meat in situations where they wouldn't? And in effect, could it contribute more to the problem than if these products didn't exist? And that's my fear here with Quorn. Because from their perspective, they'll say, well, this is going to get people eating a 50-50 blend when they would have only eaten 100% meat. But I don't think that that's the case. What I would be interested to know, though, is what your views are. Because I can imagine that someone would come across these products and they might go, hey, Ed, look, surely this is a good thing if it gets people eating 50% less meat. Now, my argument would be that I don't know if that will happen, and it might get people who were going to eat no meat to eat 50% more meat, but potentially there's another way of coming at this. And I would love to know what your thoughts are in the comments below, because for me, it felt instinctively wrong when I read it, and the more I've thought about it, the more it still feels wrong. And I have to say this, as an ethical vegan, I especially have to say this. I really feel uncomfortable with the idea of creating an ethical compromise, or something that kind of creates this idea that there is an ethical way of doing something bad. A blend of animal and plants still involves a blend of animal flesh, a dead animal being blended up. And I really don't like it when companies like Smug Dairy and like Quorn, as Quorn always have, when they try and position themselves as being a part of this important change while still fundamentally contributing to the problem that this change actually needs to resolve. The transition we need isn't a transition away from meat into vegetarianism, as Quorn products have previously insinuated by the fact that many of them are vegetarian. And it certainly isn't a transition away from the amount of animal farming we have now to 50% less. That's not the transition that we need. We need a transition away from all types of animal farming into a plant-based food system. And so when I see products or brands promoting something as being a great compromise, as being something that people can consume and feel good about, that to me is a big red flag, because yet again, animals are being removed from the conversation. And for Quorn, let's be fair, animals have always kind of been removed from this conversation. And for Smug Dairy especially, it's a product of the dairy industry. So for them, the ethics of what we do to animals has never necessarily been a top priority, let's put it that way. And now look, I'm happy to be proven wrong. I hope that my fears are alleviated in time and it turns out that these blended products are actually getting ardent meat eaters to eat 50% less meat. I hope that's what happens. I don't think it will necessarily, not from the position I'm in right now, but I hope that happens. I'd love to be proven wrong. But then my other fear becomes, well, hang on a minute. What if you get a meat eater who decides that they will eat these 50-50 blends, but they won't go any further? Because the concept of choice is quite interesting in all of this. If you have the choice between eating animals and not eating animals, what then happens if this third choice is brought into the middle? Let's say you're an animal eater, but you've become aware of the problems around it and you agree with the problems, because again, this whole concept rests on the assumption that the animal eaters are thinking about why this is a problem, are aware it's a problem, and are agreeing with the fact it is a problem. If they don't think it's a problem, they're not even going to worry about a 50-50 blend or a fully plant-based option. That's not going to happen. So again, we're appealing to a meat eater, an animal eater who is open-minded and recognizes there's a problem. But if you have that person, and the only choice that person has is to stop eating animals, does having a third option in the middle actually stop them from making that full transition? Because right now, let's say you have one option or the other, and you think that eating animals is bad, and you've kind of come to that conclusion, the only option you have to align your values and everything together is to stop eating animals. So that is the conclusion you might come to. But if you're being sold a third option, or another option, I should say, which is a 50-50 blend, and that 50-50 blend is being sold to you as something that is ticking all the boxes. It's more sustainable, it's healthier, it's telling you that this is a good thing. Hey, this is a great step to make. It's a compromise. Now that you have this other option, might that stop you from going all the way and removing animals entirely from your diet? I worry that it might. And so is this third choice, this middle choice, the availability of this middle choice, actually going to hinder people from making that full transition from eating animals to not eating animals? I worry that it might. And another thing that I suppose rolls on from that point is, does this potentially dilute the plant-based sector? Does this potentially invalidate the plant-based sector to certain consumers and to certain investors and to certain brands? Well, they think, hang on a minute, we don't need a plant-based range, we'll just create a 50-50 range. And so actually, does this 50-50 range of products compromise the success that the plant-based food sector is going to have in the future? Does it potentially act as a hurdle to people choosing wholly plant-based options, is ultimately what I'm trying to say. I worry that it might. And I suppose this conversation ties into a wider conversation about the notion of reducitarianism, people that want to reduce the amount of animal products they're consuming. Again, it's not a term I'm necessarily that comfortable with, and the merits of which I would dispute in a number of ways. And actually, this is a topic I discuss in my book, How to Argue with a Meat Eater and Win Every Time. I talk a little bit about reducing and my thoughts on that and where its shortcomings are, and actually how it could be harmful rather than helpful. So within the book, I discuss all the different arguments against veganism, but I also look at some of the arguments from people who are trying to compromise. They're not arguing against veganism, but they think that veganism might seem too dogmatic, and so we should try and meet people somewhere in the middle, 50-50, let's say. Well, I talk about that and much more in the book. So if that sounds interesting to you, then you can pick up a copy for yourself by clicking the link in my description. Anyway, let me know down below in the comments what you think. I would love to hear some alternative views. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? Have I missed something? Is there a really important argument that I've overlooked? Is there something I should have talked about more? I would love to know what you think about all of this, because undeniably it's going to be controversial, especially for us vegans. Hopefully I've been able to communicate which way I'm leaning in all of this conversation, but ultimately I'm open-minded and would love to know what you think as well. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. And as always, I look forward to seeing you all in the next video.